Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire is independent media, the cost of productions offset by supporters. Your contributions are very much appreciated and needed. You can pitch in by going to patreon.com/aroundtheempire or at paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. You can find all of these links at our website, aroundtheempire.com. In this two-part series, investigative journalist Mohamed Elmaazi joins us from London. Mohamed has been working on what's potentially one of the most explosive international scandals in recent years. Hacked documents have exposed a secretive quote-unquote charity think tank, the Institute for Statecraft, which is funded by the British Foreign Office, the US State Department, NATO, Facebook, a neoconservative foundation, and others. Mohamed located their London office in a neo-Gothic mansion, 2 Temple Place, and later accompanied a British MP on an unwelcome visit. One of the Institute for Statecraft's projects, the Integrity Initiative, possibly a front for military intelligence, is a covert propaganda network of politicians, journalists, academics, researchers, and military officers engaged in smearing political leaders and interfering in the affairs of other allied governments. Mohamed Elmaazi is a journalist with experience in human rights law, with degrees from American University in Cairo and SOAS. He contributes to Open Democracy, The Canary, The Gray Zone, and the Real News Network. Follow Mohamed on Twitter at MELMAAZI, Elmaazi. We recorded this interview on December 22nd, 2018. And this is part 2. Tell us more about the Institute for Statecraft, what you've learned.
So, if you want to understand the worldview, it's what we've described, right, with the Integrity Initiative. But the Institute for Statecraft also has other things. So there's one of the co-founders, Dan Lafayette, has written. I'll just give you one thing that he wrote. It's it's a think tank. It's still along the same lines, right? We need to modernize Britain for the future threats and challenges and obstacles that it faces. The Integrity Initiative, it makes perfect sense that it is their project. And by the way, like I said, the majority of their funding, as far as we can tell, of the Institute for Statecraft is linked to the Integrity Initiative now. So that represents a large part of what they do. But another example of something they do that I'm writing an article on yet, so it's not published. So here I go, it's breaking with you guys. Is this article that Dan Lafayette wrote that was published on their website in 2013, right? Called "The Military's Role in Building a Healthy Society," right? And it's all about how the military. What is it? What is the military ethos that people like to say exists that you get out of the military? Team building, cooperation, respect for the law without exception is one thing it says, which I found hilarious. Loyalty, duty, honor, and these are things that are very important. That okay, fine, we can understand why in some new democracies or in weak democracies people may fear the military, but that doesn't need to be the case. The military can offer all these character traits, these characteristics that I've described. This is Dan Lafayette writing, yeah, and he's got some kind of military background. I haven't been able to exactly establish what it was. One thing I read is that he was in the special forces decades ago, and that, but I can't confirm that because I haven't seen the documents. As opposed to other groups, like his co-guy who does have background in military intelligence still, right?
So they seem to be mainly motivated in boosting the image of the military, which
not just the image. The actual role of it, yeah. So there's always the what and then the why. So you want to boost the image of the military. Why is that? That's not just for the sake of doing that. There has to be a reason why. And the reason is because you want to increase its role. You want to increase support for, that's something else I've written about and I've linked to, You want to increase support for British foreign policy. So they don't really care. So I've seen stuff where it's just like the British military has a high level of respect in terms of its image in Britain, right? But the wars do not. Now they haven't been working on getting people to have a good image for the military just for the sake of it, right? They want to do it so it's like the United States, right? Where if you criticize the war, you're criticizing the troops, which quite frankly, I don't see anything wrong with criticizing troops. They're human beings, right? But anyway, that's a separate issue, right?
Well, I mean, we should keep in mind that the PNAC manifesto from, I guess, 1999 maybe, one of their main concerns was they knew that a demographic shift was happening. The baby boomers were going to retire. Therefore, the cost of retirement and health and things like that they knew was going to rise significantly. Also, the Soviet Union had fallen, so people were talking about a peace dividend and there were cuts
Absolutely.
to military funding. And so one of their main concerns was that we were going to be able to not only maintain a high level of military defense, quote unquote, spending, but they wanted to grow it seriously. So I can certainly see this institute having a very similar
Certainly a
concern
worldview.
and goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, it's not just that. So I won't hold back because this is going to come up in a future article of mine, but that's also related that I'm writing about. And I did ask Chris Williamson, the Member of Parliament who's been spearheading this campaign. He's a close ally of Corbyn. And I've written 2 articles where he's involved in the articles. So people can check that out at thecanary.co. Absolutely. So one article written by, I'll get back to the role of Britain's military in building a healthy society in a minute. Over there, it's not just about the image. They're building these cadet schools, so-called, right? And they're going to problem communities, read working class and ethnic minority communities, especially those with high Muslim population.
Oh,
Right?
really?
Yeah, and the whole thing is like, well, in order to tackle gang culture, what they call gang culture, read black, right? Because they don't talk about whites being part of gang culture here, even though the black population is very small, far smaller than the United States, right? It's Britain, right? It's not like the US in terms of the demographic, the numbers, the percentages of people of black African origin. It's far less here in the UK, right? But when you look at police documentation and police databases that we know of that have been exposed, show that the vast majority of people in gangs, what they call gangs, are black, including in areas like Manchester. Right? It's like what, right? So it's like what. Whereas like the number of what they call white people in gangs, it's like we're talking about like 10. It's like really in London there are 10 people who are white who are members of gangs. Like it's absurd, but it shows you the racialized way to which this lens is tackled. So anyway. Institute for Statecraft also gets funding from the Army and from the Ministry of Defense. And these 2 guys who founded the Institute of Statecraft also separately get funding for other groups that are not technically part of the IFS, but are separate initiatives. They're about tackling, extremism and gang culture through these cadet schools and these cadet programs that, and you see these kids with uniforms and stuff. I refer to it a bit in my most recent article about Lafayette, right? About this guy. So, and Chris Donnelly has written this is one of the leaked documents in a 2018 document, a draft, where he's like the future of the British Foreign Office. And this is the thing, this is what they're saying. It's like, okay, we're in a world with people are asleep now because they've had the benefits of the last 70 years of living in a rules-based order in the Western liberal states. Now, and this is sort of falling apart now. And it's not like I disagree with everything of what he's saying, right? And he's like, this is now going to be falling apart. And so what we've seen is 20% of the funding, say during World War II, right? 20% of the funding that was directed towards military, right, if you like, and FCO, so foreign and military-related matters, has been shifted towards housing and welfare and healthcare. So that the balance is like 60% of what we spend, or 80% of what we spend, is towards welfare-related matters and health and social and education, and far less is towards military, right? This is compared to the United States. It's not true in the United States. Obviously, in the United States, spends far more on military. You guys call it defense, but it's not defense, right? It's military, right? You spend more than the next 12 countries combined, right, including Britain.
And we
including Russia.
we would like our NATO allies to do the same, by the way.
And so would they, and that's part of it. And this is what Chris Donnelly says. There's a quote here. I haven't put it out yet in a piece, so I'm going to have to do it somewhat by memory. Maybe I'll be able to find it in a second. In which he says, so our objective has to be to convince the British population that we need to take that money from welfare and health and education, what have you, and give it back, right, from Second World War to FCO and to the Ministry of Defense.
Which is the same. That's the same thing that PNAC was saying in their manifesto.
And he's saying if we can't do this immediately because of political, it's not politically palatable, then for now, then we're going to have to figure out how to do more with less resources. Now, Britain still spends a hell of a lot on these things, right? But they think it needs to spend more. And one of the reasons is, it's Russia and China. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't like major conflicts with Russia and China, but there are major conflicts with Russia and China because people choose to be conflicting with them, right? It's like, and I'm not saying that if all the oligarchs of the world get together, that's going to be good for the rest of us. I'm not one of these people who sees Russian oligarchy as like the good guys, but I also don't see
exactly.
Right? I don't see nuclear war as being like a good thing either. And quite frankly, seeking confrontation with Russia on Russia's border means that you end up having problems in Ukraine, which while the average Russian, the average American may not suffer, people in Ukraine are suffering, and they're suffering heavily because of it.
That's
and
right.
Whatever Russia's illegal activity in Ukraine, backing the illegal overthrow of an elected government that Congress had said was elected, whatever if you want to call elections democratic, they said that they had satisfied their rules under the State Department, which even the U.S. elections don't satisfy. There's 8 months left to his presidential term, Viktor Yanukovych. They could have just waited if they thought they would have won in an election. And obviously some of them.
He actually agreed. He actually agreed to step down early too.
Right, yeah, exactly, because things have gotten so bad. I'm not saying he wasn't corrupt. I'm not saying he's not an oligarch. We only seem to be using the term oligarch, which is a Greek word towards the Russians. Britain's an oligarchy. America's an oligarchy. So is France. So is Spain. I think there's this almost like racist thing that people have bought into. It's even on Twitter. People have attacked me. Where I see people constantly using the term oligarch to describe Russians, including Russians who live in Britain. If you're a Russian oligarch in Britain, right, what is your oligarchy? Right, it is British, right? Right. If you have power in Britain, that makes you an oligarch. It's not in Russia anymore, right? You've taken your money. You're based in Britain, but people aren't referring to, they'll just talk about the rich or the elite in Britain. They won't call them oligarchs.
Yeah, but I mean, there really is a transition. This is a much bigger subject for a different podcast, but there's a transition. Oligarchs are now more of a what some people call a transnational capital class. So their borders are
some
less.
of them are, certainly. Some of them are, not all of them. Lots of them are very stationary. Right? If you've got an international nature to you, yeah, sure, lots of them are. But, no, I agree with that. But you have to look at what is the definition of oligarchy, right? It's a society in which a small number of people have the influence over policy and over government. Well, that's always been the case in Britain, right? Democracy has nothing to do with elections, right? That's something else that's like, over time, I started to realize, right? Democracy in ancient Greece, ancient Greeks, and other democracies, democratic states and small democratic cities, right? Not principalities, small, they tended to be smaller. You never had a massive, like Britain-sized democracy, right? Mm-hmm. This is a side issue, so we'll get back to the main subject. But just to mention, and that's something worth thinking about, right? If you look at the history of democracy, even in, say, in ancient Greece, where only citizens could be in government, and of course women weren't citizens, so that's how you got around that, and they still had slaves. But separate from that, of the ones who were, unlike, say, in a republic, so look at how the United States was founded, right? Only a small group of people could run for election and vote. And that was men who owned massive amounts of land, right? And who were incredibly wealthy, and some other people. But that's basically it. And that was modeled off of France and Britain. That is that system. In Greece, it wasn't like that. You did not get into power by being elected. No, 1 out of every 100 did, right? In Greek democratic states. Everyone else got in by rote, right? By sortition, by lot, right? Which was, ballote is the name for ball, and your name would be written on a ball and be circulated like a lottery. That's how you get into a jury system. If you think about it, the jury system is the most democratic part of society. How do you get in there? You're not elected. And so there's this quote from Aristotle where he says, elections lead to oligarchy, democracy, sortition leads to democracy, which is hilarious because when people say, when you understand that, finally, when you understand that, you realize, it's not just, the system itself is designed not to be democratic. The system is designed to prevent democracy. And there's a guy who wrote this book that is, a republic is not a democracy, right? When they founded the United States, right, you have quotes in the Federalist Papers from like Washington who says that like democracy always leads to national suicide, right? These people did not refer to the United States ever as being a democracy. Britain was not referred to as being a democracy until about 180 years ago, right? It's just like it's a propaganda thing. Until about 180 years ago, they did not use the term because people understood democracy literally meant demos is the masses, right? Rule by the masses. So eventually, just like you have people who call themselves socialist or the Socialist Party, but they don't implement socialist policies, right? It became a propaganda thing. So we'll say, okay, fine, we're indirect democracy. We're parliamentary democracy. We're electoral representative democracy is the full term, right? So they say, fine, we're not a traditional democracy, but we're a representative democracy. But that is like, okay, but we're not. If I elect you, who has the power to make the votes on policy? You do. You can literally lie to my face and say, I will vote this way. And then when it comes to time to vote, you don't vote this way. And there's nothing I can do. What am I going to do? Like put a gun to your head? That's a crime, right? Am I supposed to follow you around for every single piece of legislation you vote for? I can't. In a representative system, the representative has the power, and that's deliberate, right? So democracy is more of a delegate-based system. So it's like literally, it is by its very nature designed to represent the interests of a few.
I mean,
you can probably cut this all out, I assume, because that is a complete digression. So you're going to cut it for a separate.
No, I think that is going to rise up. That whole issue is going to rise up because we all have an efficient way to vote now. So that's gonna come to a head at some point. But yeah, let's get back on statecraft and also
right. So Donnelly's worldview is like as you described, but if most people heard this in Britain right now, they would be outraged, right? Because most people do not want to take another 20% of our state funding and give it. They already don't like austerity as it is, which is all just an attack on the welfare state, right? If you look at research done by the Legatum Institute, which is linked to people linked to the Institute for Statecraft. Legatum Institute I already mentioned, right? Market fundamentalist. The guy who heads it up is Russian. I think he's Russian. And is all about, he's fully on board on this Cold War 2.0 with Russia.
Yeah, I mean, it's a much bigger project, right? Of transforming Europe, right? From less socialist policies and more privatization and more money for the military. It's like
what we've been doing is not enough, which is fascinating because that's for me where the myopia is. I agree with lots of their assessments in certain respects, including the co-founder Chris Donnelly, right, about what's coming on, conflicts that we're going to see, more conflict with the East. It's just the causes for it. At no point, so one report in the Institute of Statecraft has this line, which is the West has had a hyper-competitive system thrust upon it, something like this. It's like, really? From where? Mars? Who? Where's this hype? So it's like, it's not even, what do you mean, like capitalism? It's been thrust upon it? From where? Like Russia? Like capitalism was born in Britain and Europe, right? Like, but they don't mention it. They say a hyper-competitive system. Like, we didn't ask to be here, but we're here. And we need to be awake to the reality of the situation. That's the Institute of Statecraft, right? And that's their documentation. So that means there's no kind of self-reflection on, okay, we're having more lack of faith in our institutions, and we need to increase the faith. Perhaps the lack of faith is not Russian hybrid warfare. Perhaps the lack of faith is the failure of the system to deliver positive outcomes for large numbers of people, right? But they don't discuss that. That's not in their worldview. So the whole reason we have lack of faith is because people are believing Russian hybrid warfare, like RT and Sputnik radio. I mean, it's absurd. There's completely disconnect. It's like I always call it Marie Antoinette syndrome. The former ruler of France who allegedly, when the peasants were rioting, and she's told, the peasants are rioting. She's like, why? And it's like, because they have no food. They have no bread. And she allegedly says, let them eat cake, right? And whether it's not, it's meant to reflect how, sorry, I'll just finish on this. Whether it's true or not, it's meant to reflect how disconnected she was from the reality. In the end, she got her head chopped off, right? And you have this revolution. Once people get so disconnected from the reality of how people are living en masse, right? That's when you have the possibility of both good and terrible things coming about. And the history, I think, from you may disagree, but history shows it mostly to be terrible rather than good. Revolutions may have, people pushing revolutions, quite often they become counter-revolutionary, or they impose a different version of the same thing, or just loads of people die and the system just falls apart and nothing good comes out of it. Yeah, so it's not always positive that comes out of a collapse of a system.
Yeah, it's the exception to the rule. I mean, Stephen Cohen's been making this point for quite a while now, saying, the American Revolution is the exception to the rule. Normally what happens is the most extreme elements become armed and they take over, so worse off than you were. But I keep seeing the same thing over and over again. It's a perpetual problem of empire and expansionism, right? I mean, the reason for this empire is to basically be able to continually expand and grow, make the rest of the world compliant, and open up their resources and their markets so that it can be capitalized upon by the root of the empire. But it seems like
that's Lenin's imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism.
Yeah, and so they realize they realize the effects of this and how it's affecting things back at home. So it's like they're anticipating, those negative impacts, migration being one of them, which seems like one of the things that this group is concerned about. And, unrest. I guess I'm not putting this very well, but I think
No. What you're saying makes perfect sense, is that they understand that the cost of imperialism and capitalism is instability and conflict. And if you're not going to challenge the system itself, then that means you're going to have to push all kinds of mitigating factors to be able to maintain the system, which is a massive surveillance state, which is Fortress Europe, which is the militarization of borders, which is the militarization of police, which is increased indoctrination in schools, which is reduction in understanding of history, which is more media consolidation, which is more, information warfare and propaganda, right? Because if you're not prepared to look at the nature of the system, whether you want to call it capitalism, or some people refer to it as neoliberalism, which is the stage of capitalism, but it's not like capitalism was ever good for the majority of people. Right? This is just one manifestation of the capitalist system, is neoliberalism, right? So yeah, you're absolutely right, is that, okay, well, we're not prepared to challenge the capitalist system. We like the capitalist system. We benefit from it. We being whoever it is that's writing these reports and that has this worldview. So how do we defend the inevitable consequences of it, of the blowback, of the instability? Capitalism has always been a very unstable system, right? With this business cycles, if you like to use some terminology of some people, it peaks and it crashes, and it peaks and it crashes, and that's normal in the system. There was a brief period where the Americans were able to bring control over it when they controlled the banks and all the rest of it, but eventually you reached a recession, and then new policies came in to then start undermining all the controls and regulations on banking, right, to break the United States out of recession. Right, and then he shifted away from the gold standard. You have new monetary theory and all these things, right? It's not about. So that means all the reforms we've had, the peak reforms, I think we had amazing reforms, and they've all been undermined. And so what they're talking about here is, but the thing is, they don't mention any of that in older documents. You can see some kind of thing where they understand that capitalism has these problems, so we need to protect ourselves from people overthrowing us, say, or from unrest. They don't write it like this. The way things are here from the Institute for Statecraft is, it's all external. It's not internal. It's not internal to the system that we live in. We are not part of creating this hyper-competitive world. This has been thrust upon us. We are good and righteous. It's even more myopic. It's even more black and white, right? Rather than the old school stuff that you read, you see there is an understanding that, like, yeah, okay, this is capitalism, so we need to guard against the instabilities within the capitalist system. That's not the Institute for Statecraft, not what I've read thus far. The key players, it's all about, this is Russia, this is China, this is Al-Qaeda, this is ISIS.
Yeah, it's the latest boogeyman, yeah.
Yeah, but and also very simplistic. I'm not impressed with the intellect, I have to say. I'm more impressed with the intellect of these other people that we've referred to, people from the Council on Foreign Relations and what have you. It's almost like these people are cheap copies of cheap copies. That's why I always say that our politicians are, whatever you want to say about the old world leaders, the mass murderers and all the rest of it, classists, it's absolutely true. Even the founders of the United States. Well, I would say the bad guys won, by the way. I wouldn't say the good guys won. These people went to war to maintain this massive slave state. Most Africans, black Africans, fought on the side of the crown, not on the side of the so-called revolutionaries, because they wanted to fight to make sure that they could keep slavery. Remember, slavery was being abolished in Britain, and they could see that. It's taught like it's a revolution, but if you read Gerald Horne, there's a good argument to see this like it's counter-revolutionary, right? If you were a Native American, the good guys did not win the Revolutionary War, the War for Independence. If you're African American, the good guys didn't win because slavery then dominated for, however long it did, chattel slavery, right? And that's why most slaves, like I said, fought for the side of the British. But the point is, even them, Washington, Jefferson, Hancock, all these people, you read their stuff, they are well-read, they're worldly, they see the contradictions in the system, they're most of them mass murderers, right? Washington in particular, the largest slave owner possibly in history, right? Owned loads of slaves, massive land property speculator, right? It's like Trump, right? It's constantly stealing land from the Native Americans. That's how he became wealthy. That's how he became the first president of the United States, the richest man in America at the time, right? But you read their stuff. Even he was not the highest level of intellect, but is compared to the people now, right? And even later on, even Second World War, Roosevelt, Churchill, all these other people, whatever you want to say about them, you compare them to the people who are now the politicians now. They all feel like cheap copies of copies. Nothing new under the sun. They're not, lots of people raved about Obama. I wasn't particularly impressed with his. I think it's just because of who he's compared to. The rabid right wing. You had Bush as well before him, and then Trump after him. But I wasn't that impressed. He didn't have a vision like previous leaders had a vision. It was just, I'm gonna manage this thing. So that's what I get out of these people. There's no nuance to their critique, right? It is portraying the military. British military is a good thing. We do good things. We fight just wars. The other people engage in bad activities. We don't. We counter bad activities, and that's why we're here. It's very black and white. Childish.
They're a threat to our system, and our system is good, and it is pretty basic.
We don't illegally invade countries and destroy them. That's not us.
Well,
right? That's why it's embarrassing when you're reading this stuff. But it's frightening because lots of them clearly believe it, and whether they believe it or not, they're seriously pushing it. Right? That's what's frightening about it.
I mean, we've already got a system that defends all of that and spins all of that. I wonder why. I wonder why they felt they needed this more now. But embedded in the information about the Integrity Initiative, it says, for its first 2 years, the Integrity Initiative was funded by private individuals. And I find that very curious. That might explain,
The Integrity Initiative or the Institute for Statecraft?
This is from the Integrity Initiative statement that they issued on November 26th. Down a couple paragraphs, it says, for its first 2 years, the Integrity Initiative was funded by private individuals. Funding for 2017 and 2018 was provided by a grant by the UK Foreign and Commonwealth FCO office. This reflects their appreciation of the importance of the threat and a wish to support civil society programs, is another code word, seeking to rebuild the ability of democratic societies to resist large-scale malicious disinformation and influence campaigns.
Yeah, they're big on democracy.
Yeah, but that first, I wonder who those private individuals were at the root of this. But yeah, so there's that, and then just so that we can, because we're starting to run out of time, the Jeremy Corbyn aspect of it, and now you've got a couple of Labour MPs who are very interested in this. If you would talk about that aspect of this and where it's going.
Right. So there's all kinds of things going on here in Britain, right? So you have the Brexit deal. What kind of relationship will Britain have with the European Union when it leaves? There are people who are pushing for there to be a second referendum. I'm certainly supportive of whatever the deal is being negotiated to be voted upon, because there's a whole thing. We should be able to vote on whether or not we like this deal, or to see if we can renegotiate it with a different group of people. So that's that going on. That's a very big deal. You have everyone believes at some point that Jeremy Corbyn will probably become Prime Minister, right? So there's lots of work, I think, to undermine him before he even gets there, right? People think that the attacks, the non-stop attacks, is anti-Semite, basically all the things he's not, you call him, right? So he's an anti-racist campaigner for decades, even before he was a member of Parliament in the 80s, right? He's a long-time anti-war, anti-imperialist, he's proper, you call me a racist before you call him a racist, that kind of thing, and I'm most certainly not. And that's happening a lot, right? Because he's critical of the state of Israel, he's connected to Palestine solidarity. He and others, like Chris Williamson MP, are being called anti-Semites. So, you happen to be seen shaking hands with somebody who knows somebody else who said something that some people interpret as being anti-Semitic, then you're an anti-Semite and you should be kicked out of the party. It's that kind of level of hysteria that's being pushed. And I think all of it is about undermining Corbyn and undermining their anti-imperialist message and undermining their Palestine solidarity message. So within that environment, you have all this other stuff going on, including the Integrity Initiative, sort of criticizing and attacking people on the left as being Putin puppets and recycling stories that other people have written. And so this has made its way into Parliament, and people like Chris Williamson MP for Derby North and some others have raised this. And they've said, what's going on here, it's not acceptable for a Foreign Office-funded outfit to be either interfering in the national security affairs of other sovereign states that are allied states like Spain, right? A fellow democracy is the language they use. Despite everything I said about democracy, when other people will refer to the West as being democratic, right? So we'll use that language because that's what they use, liberal democracies, capitalist democracies, if you like. And that's what you're saying. This is outrageous, right? We need to have an investigation to that. And it's completely unacceptable for the Foreign Office to be funding a group that is in any way attacking, political figures in Britain, whether they're conservative or not, or whether it's,
it is outrageous.
It's beyond that. It's completely outrageous. This can't be what your remit is. And so one of the things that I've also written about as well, and that's the feeling I get from speaking to some of these people, is that, we should be deciding policy in public, getting as much of the facts as possible. And then our institutions should be implementing that. So even if we're not a democracy, in an open society, a representative state, if you want to call it that, it should still be the public who are deciding. Of course, that's not how it is, and it never was like that. But that should be our objective as much as possible, right? Well, what this is the inverse of that.
How do they defend themselves about, what do they say? How do they defend?
Like government ministers, you mean?
Well, no, the Integrity Initiative itself. How do they defend this, the smear campaign that they're doing on Jeremy Corbyn? Do they deny it?
Yeah, they say, okay, fine. A few tweets were made, but really it shouldn't be, if anything was done to criticize Corbyn, that shouldn't be the case, and we'll look into it. And, certainly our focus is not inside Britain, and or we've criticized Tories as much as we've criticized Labour. And even if that were true, it would still be unacceptable, but it's not true. Right.
So just a few bad apples, some bad apples did it.
Well, or just it's collateral. It's collateral. Don't make a big issue out of it. And anything we've done we shouldn't have done, we'll apologize and we'll delete any offending tweets. And really, our focus is Russia. It's not Britain. Anything that happens to make its way to Britain is it's a minimal of what we do. It's a small issue, small potatoes. And then from the government, when parliamentarians are asking members of government, I know Parliament is part of government, but in this country they refer to the executive branch as government. Right? Even though you'd say there's three branches of government, right? Judiciary, legislative. Here, when they talk about government, the term, they tend to mean the executive branch of government.
They mean the cabinet or whatever.
Yeah, the cabinet office, exactly. The people who are... And of course, in this country, to be a major cabinet member, you have to also be a member of parliament. So there's not a separation of powers there, right? You have to be. If you're a member of parliament, then you remain a member of parliament with your constituency. And if you get elected, your prime minister has a constituency, as an MP, right? So in Parliament, they've been making written questions to the Ministry of Defence, to the Foreign Office, saying, how much money are you giving to them? Are you leasing property to them? What are the various operations that you're funding? Can we see the documents? And they have to respond. Sort of like, think of it like a freedom of information request, but it's different because this is coming from a member of Parliament. So you have to respond. You have to respond within a shorter time frame. And so they come back and they make it sound like this is all about Russia. There's nothing to do with us. It was countering Russian malign influence. So it's like out of the documentation. we're not doing anything illegitimate. We'll, if we find out that there was anything that has crossed the line, it will be, 1% of the stuff. They don't answer anything about Spain, the Moncloa campaign I mentioned. They're saying nothing about that. They're ignoring that completely, even when it's mentioned. And so, that's it. That's the line. And you have some like conservative and right-wing journalists, like anti-Russia journalists, who are all part of the Russiagate narrative here. Okay, so very little is written about this here in the mainstream, in the corporate and establishment press. So I've seen one article on the BBC, one article in the Times. Rupert Murdoch owns the Times. The Times was historically the establishment paper here. It's not as good quality as it was, before Rupert Murdoch bought it. But that's like everything he buys, he retards everything that he touches deliberately as part of his policy.
Well, I mean, they're part of these networks, so we shouldn't expect them to, to talk about their wrongdoings.
Yeah. Or it's just a worldview that they perpetuate. Basically, the article in the Times was, okay, the left wing are going to tell you this is this deep state run op, and it's not. There's nothing to see here. I think they do good work. I wish they could do more, and they're actually pretty small. That's what Edward Lucas wrote that. In the BBC, it's mostly quotes, and it says, the headline is like Russia hack, right? So the headline focuses on the allegations.
Okay.
The article does give you some information, though, as to what's going on, so you're not left completely in the dark. The BBC can allow some decent, articles sometimes written, and you can read between the lines of what you'll get out from the BBC. But it's online. I don't know what they've done in terms of video broadcast, right?
Yeah, that's a tactic we've seen here, too. When WikiLeaks published the Podesta and the DNC emails, the media here focused mainly on the fact that they were hacked. They at least tried to do that.
Oh, and they do that here, by the way. They say, look, you're buying into this. Look, Americans feel regrets now that they focused on the hack on Clinton documents, that they didn't question more. That's what they've written, right? Whereas here, so we need to do that. You have to ask yourself, why would Russia hack? It's like, let's say you convince me that Russians were directly involved in that. It's like, well, because this is an organization that is an anti-Russia organization. That's why. It's not deep. It's not like, oh, that's surprising to me that Russians might be involved in hacking your group. What's interesting to me is your work is all in English. Well, the English stuff is, but most of the work thus far is in English, right? So what does that tell you? It's so your targets are English speakers, and I don't mean English-speaking Russians who happen to live, right, in Britain. If your stuff is all about Russia, then surely shouldn't it be in Russian? But this is English stuff because you're trying to convince a British public and an English-speaking public of certain things, right?
Yeah.
It's a domestic propaganda on the operation as much as it is an international operation, if not more, because most of their stuff is written in English, and that's that's important for people to remember when they say, "Oh, you're buying into, Putin's plans." It's like these things are written in English and they're targeted. Do you not understand that? And then in Spanish, right? And then eventually German and Greek, right? So it's understand that part.
So tell me about this MP, Williamson, who you found out that he was going to go try to visit the Institute for Statecraft, and he allowed you to go along with him.
Because I'd already been there. He hadn't been there. And I was speaking to him. Yeah, so I found it. I think I might have been the first person to find it, but a guy from Sputnik was the first one to write an article about it. So I found it on the 7th of December. I was looking through, and I almost gave up, right? Because I'm looking at Google Maps, and I'm going to the address, and I'm not seeing anything there. And the whole area is where the Knights Templar used to be based, right? So it's called.
So what part of London is this?
South London, near the Embankment. So it's near the South Bank, right? So there's the river there, and there's it's heavy with law firms there, or barristers' chambers is a specific type of lawyer. They wear the wigs, they're the trial attorneys. They're all self-employed barristers, but they work in groups called chambers. So we'll call them a law firm for simplicity's sake, but that's where all these chambers are based. And they're all these neo-Gothic sort of buildings. I used to work, because I worked in law, so I used to work not too far off from that area, walking distance, right, Chancery Lane. And so that's why I knew the area. And so I'm going around, and it's just barristers' chambers after barristers' chambers. I was like, oh, maybe they're in one of these chambers. And I'm staring at a building that is clearly not the name of the place. And I go in and I speak to one woman. I'm like, do you know where this place is? And she says, yeah, it's going to be around here. So it's all cobbled and side streets and all of what have you. And I come to this building and it's like, okay, I see a bulldog outside, a metallic bulldog. I was like, okay. And I was thinking, oh, I did see a reference to the Bulldog Trust. And I go inside and they're having a whole Christmas thing going on. And I see someone. I was like, you know what? It's going to be like that Scottish mill. There's not going to be anything here. And I speak to somebody. I was like, hi, do you know have you heard of this Institute for Statecraft? He's like, oh yeah, it's right around the corner down the basement. So it's not in the main building. It's down in the basement of the building. So they're obviously renting space from the people that own this place, which is a charity, a philanthropic organization that gives out money to different groups called the Bulldog Trust. And so I go downstairs, I see a sign with an arrow, the Institute for Statecraft, and another one. I knock on the door, and eventually I get inside. In the end, I didn't know at the time, but the guy that I encountered inside was one of the co-founders, Dan Lafayette. So anyway, so I write about that, and that's what in my core article with Max Blumenthal is about that, about how I discovered the place. But before we published it, a guy from Sputnik had also discovered, Craig Murray, a former British diplomat, had sent him the address, the Sputnik journalist. Kim, I don't want to mispronounce his name. We link to him, right? So we give him credit as well because we say he's published before us. And so they went there as well. And so then I was in a conversation with Chris Williamson MP asking his thoughts about this document that I told you about, the role of the military in a healthy society, right, in Britain. And I was asking his thoughts about the worldview portrayed in that and the worldview portrayed by Donnelly, that we need to take funding from healthcare and what have you, and we need to convince the public that we need to shift it to the military one way or another, right, and towards the Foreign Office. And at the end of the conversation, he happens to mention on an aside that he's going to go there. So I say, well, do you mind if I come with you? Because I was like, great, I can take more photographs and stuff. And he said, yeah. And so that's it. So I meet up with him in the morning. So the first time around I met them was in the evening. And this time around, I meet up in the morning with Chris Williamson. And he knocks on the door, and a young person answers. And he says, hi, I'm Chris Williamson, MP for Derby North. Is this Institute for Statecraft? He said, yes. He's like, oh, let me get the director. And he closes the door. And then after a while, the door opens up again. He says, hi, I'm Chris Williamson. And then he slams the door in his face.
Are you kidding me? That's the part.
Yeah. And so
you're there watching it. Like, what was the expression on the guy's face when he slams the door on the MP?
Because I never got to see the guy's face. So somebody else was there with a camera. So they got what they saw from what I saw the picture from the other guy's camera. I can confirm that's the one I met when I came in. And that same person is Dan Lafayette, who's the co-director and co-founder of the Institute for Statecraft, who's a guy with a military background, but we're not 100% sure, who is the one who wrote this article on the role of Britain, a healthy role in a healthy society, Britain's military role, the role of the military in creating a healthy society, and all these other things that he does. So he's a key player with this. And so it was funny, and Chris Williamson continued to speak to the door. He's like, I want to speak to you about Pedro Baños. That's the Spanish colonel. I'd like to speak to you about your smears of Jeremy Corbyn. Knock, knock, knock. Hello? It was funny, actually, and I've got that on video. We haven't published it yet.
Is he surprised at the reaction? Is Williamson surprised?
He's not a young person, so he's been around the block, right? So he just says, well, it looks like we're just going to have to get our answers from, by other means, because, obviously they're not interested. And bear in mind, this is a British government-funded charity, ostensibly. Like, it's a registered charity. It's funded by the British government. And, you've slammed the door in the face of, rude. First of all, that's very rude. How can you not have just like a straightforward conversation? So I'm very busy right now. Make an appointment. This is a morning with an elected representative of the government from whom you get the majority of your money, right?
Yeah, it's more than, I don't know what word to put on it, but it's more than rude. It's it's arrogant. He has no worry about any kind of accountability to an elected member of parliament, right?
Yeah.
Because
it's of the opposition party. It might have been if he was a member of the Tory party, the right-wing party, but because he's Chris Williamson, Yeah, no, but it is rude. And this guy, and bear in mind, this is a guy who's taught courses at the UK Defence Academy. Like this is this is a guy who's been around for a long time. The one who slammed the door. He's part of the military establishment. He's taught courses. He's part of like, and he's not like some young person who's like freaking out or anything, right? And he gets his money from our government as well as from NATO, as well as from the State Department, et cetera, et cetera. The majority is from government. So yeah, so that's that, and that's what I accompanied with him. I accompanied him there, and I wrote 2 articles with Chris Williamson there. The first one was with a picture of the door having been slammed, and Chris Williamson's face there in front of the sign that says Institute for Statecraft. And then the second one is a follow-up, because Williamson wrote a letter directly to the Prime Minister of Spain. He sent it out yesterday. It was dated yesterday. And I saw it, and so I wrote a short piece about it. And that's the Moncloa campaign, to say, as you may already be aware, this thing happened where your first choice for the head of Homeland Security was undermined by a group of journalists and politicians in Spain who are actually part of a network that is funded by my government. I'm sure you agree this is outrageous and there needs to be an investigation. He says, as an internationalist and as a socialist, I believe that there must be both a Spanish government and a British government investigation into these activities.
Okay, so Williamson's pretty shrewd. He realizes he needs to get some more people on his side.
He wants to keep it going. He's a dog with a bone, right?
So he is like a bulldog, right? He's going to keep after this.
Yes.
I feel like I don't know. Obviously, none of us know, but I feel like if you keep pulling on this thread, that this organization, I mean, who knows where this could lead, right?
Yeah, so I don't know how much of a new briefing has just been published, a very long briefing by David Miller and some other people. Briefing note on the Integrity Initiative. I'll send you a link. By Paul McKee, I don't know how to pronounce that, David Miller, Jake Mason, and Piers Robinson. And this is the Working Group on Syria, Propaganda and Media, as dated 21st of December 2018. It's 47 pages long, so it came out yesterday. And it's it's about this, the Integrity Initiative, the Institute for Statecraft, who lots of these people are, and they cover lots of stuff that like my pieces are going to cover or have written about, but hasn't been published yet. And so yeah, well, it's just one of those things. You keep the story alive, and sometimes you never know what else will come out, right? But like we said, there's a budget of £100 million in the Foreign Office for this. These people are getting 2% of that, right? So where else is the rest of the money being spent? So yeah, there is also a wider environment as well. So these people, lots of them, or like 3 or 4 of them, are members, like I said, of Specialist Group Military Intelligence, Army Reserve, right? Including Chris Donnelly. And that is based in Denison Barracks in Hermitage, the west from London. It's not in London, right? That is also where the 77 Brigade are based. The 77 Brigade, so named, is named after the 77th Indian Infantry that was based in India in like the Second World War, that was run, co-established by this individual who also, Wingate, who's like a special forces guy before the term special forces was a thing, British special forces, who was also a Zionist, who also ran and created the special night squads in Palestine with the Haganah network that ended up becoming the Israeli military. And so they ran all kinds of counterintelligence operations inside Palestine because the state of Israel didn't exist, attacking people and terrorism and all kinds of other things. So this name of this military unit, which is they do a number of things, and one of the things that they do is they're engaged in psychological warfare, and to use social media. Social media is a big part of it. So, but psyops, right? That's what psychological operations and information warfare is now the new terminology nowadays. So their name harkens back to this guy Wingate and this group that he created, but just as a side issue. That's who Wingate was. He was also a Christian Zionist who engaged in terrorism against Palestinians, right? So there's this homage to him and the group he created and worked in Burma. I think they did operations in the Second World War, and then he died there. And he's a very well-known figure, for people who were British special forces during the Second World War, and very well-known figure among Zionists because of his dedication to founding a Jewish-only state in historic Palestine, right? So those people, the 77 Brigade, who engage in PSYOPs and who are a branch of the military, and they're both civilian, so they're part-time military people, reservists. That's what a reservist is in this country. Someone who's a civilian, but who also works part-time for the military, and that's how you get all kinds of skills that you wouldn't otherwise have, nuclear physics or people who are specialists in tax law or, these things that you want, but that it's just too expensive for you to pay to just train people in yourself, because one day they could just leave the military, right? So this is a way that you have part-timers, and they're reservists, and then you have full-timers also who are part of the 77 Brigade. So specialist group military intelligence are run out of there, are based out of there. The 77 Brigade are based out of there. And I know from some documentation I've seen from leaked documents of invoices to the Ministry of Defense, some work has addresses linked to the same barracks, right, with Chris Donnelly. So and also the head of 77 Brigade, the current military head, Chris Bell, and the former head, both their names appear in documents as being part of the British cluster. Their names and email addresses are there, right? Not Chris Bell's email address, but somebody else's. And that's Brigadier Chris Bell. He's a brigadier, right? He's head of the 77 Brigade. So they have links, both direct and indirect, with other groups that are, literally, psychological warfare groups, like PSYOPs groups. They're part of the actual military, right? As well as this sort of independent sort of NGO charity, the Institute for State Crime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about it? That's really something. So what do you think? Should we wrap up here? Or
yeah,
I feel like we could.
Otherwise it'll be way too long, I think, right?
Yeah, I can split this into 2 episodes.
Cool.
So give us, wrap this up for us if you can. I know it's not easy to do, but, where are you going with this? Just, anything you want to say before we wrap up.
Okay, so my future pieces, and I know Max has also got his future pieces. Some of them will be and some of them will be individual in terms of who's written them. We'll be looking at this latter thing that I've described for you, which is the kind of worldview, because I haven't gone into that much in the articles I've actually written, is the worldview of these people, the environment, this push to kind of reform the military in order to face new challenges. So future pieces will be looking at that, and also just like individual things. So I haven't written. I'm in the process of writing that piece about the role of encouraging the increased militarization of British society. That is a good thing. That the way they structure the military, that we need more of that in our society. That is something that's a standalone piece that I'm going to be looking at, because that's something I've written about, right? Because the military is all about hierarchy and obedience, right? And order. It's not about democracy. It's the opposite of a democracy. It actually has many elements of a fascist system. Literally. It's, obeying orders without question. In the words of one person, a former Special Forces guy called Ben Griffin, who's now part of Veterans for Peace, he says, looking back on it and having studied it, I've realized that there are 3 things they instill that is really part of the military ethos. The first is to obey orders without question. The second is to instill a gang mentality. And the third is to remove the natural psychological barrier to kill, right? And it says, so when we talk about like instilling a military ethos in our children, which is what is happening in Britain more and more, just bear that in mind, right? So that's the kind of things that moving forward that I want to look at, and the role that these people at the Integrity Initiative and the Institute for Statecraft also see it as necessary to push that angle, the militarization of British society, in addition to their work on, quote unquote, countering malign Russian influence. And so I'll just end on a point that I've made in, I think, my most recent piece, which is that, at the end of the day, transparency, we can't expect full transparency to ever come from the mainstream press or the corporate and establishment press, right? So what we need are muckrakers and truth seekers and independent journalists and whoever else are prepared to poke holes and expose stories, right? Because the more we know, the better, more informed we are, the more we're able to actively engage in policy making. If we just constantly leave policy making to the likes of, Chris Donnelly and Dan Lafayette, then I would say that it's quite likely that our situation is just going to continue to push from bad to worse, because their answer to everything seems to be more of the same, right? More funding for the military, more privatization, more outsourcing, more militarism domestically, right? That seemed more. So if you don't agree with that, well then, stay informed, and check out our articles both at the Grey Zone Project and also at thecanary.co, where both I and my colleague Tom Coburg have been writing about this. And if you can, donate money. All right. And definitely donate
independent
money.
media.
Yeah, including around the empire as well. We were talking about that earlier. More people need to donate to Around the Empire. I know you don't ask for it, but I'm asking people to do it.
Yeah, it's important to support independent media. I do it myself a little bit. Wish I could do more, but I do what I can. And if not, then you can see the direction things are going in. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. I have a strong feeling we should revisit this, and that we probably will, because I don't think the story ends here. I think you're onto something, pretty big. It may not be new, but it just is. It's another way of peeling the onion, if you will. And with the rise of Jeremy Corbyn, it's coinciding. It's almost like it's meant to be reported and exposed some more now. So I hope it goes. I hope that MP stays on it, and I hope you stay on it. And I'll be watching from across the pond here. And again, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that's the end of part 2 of this 2-part series. Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Mohamed Elmaazi. Follow Mohamed on Twitter at Elmaazi, MELMAAZI. Find his work at The Canary and The Grey Zone. The Around the Empire podcast is independent media, brought to you with the help of our donors. You can pitch in at patreon.com/aroundtheempire or by doing a one-time donation on our website, aroundtheempire.com. Follow us on Twitter at Around the Empire. The syndicated audio podcast is the main focus of Around the Empire and where we have the most traffic. I'd like to add some video and live stream content in the new year. Please help us do that by hitting the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. That's free. So we can gather enough subscribers for revenue there. Also use the thumbs up to like the individual videos. Subscribe to the audio podcast on your preferred podcast app. We're on most of them: iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Music, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and others. If you like the podcast, take a minute, leave a nice review. It helps. Here's a Happy New Year's toast to a more just and peaceful 2019. Take care, everyone.